We have a great panel here. So what I'd like to do is start off by having each speaker introduce themselves briefly and share a personal example, also briefly, about a moment when your career took a positive turn, maybe with help from a manager or a mentor or something. So do you want to go first here?
Great. Hi, everybody. I hope you're not in lunch coma for this amazing panel. So my name is Dave. I'm the co-founder of 10KC. We're the world's largest diversity founded mentoring platform. And how 10KC started was through a personal career experience. I grew up in a really small town. I was this gay kid in a small town, and someone said, "You've got to be an entrepreneur." And they did that over a coffee, and that's when I learned what mentorship was. And now run the largest mentorship platform in the world. So it has really been a full circle.
Roz?
Hi, everyone. I am Francuz-Harris, Vice President of Talent Acquisition at Zillow. And wow, the positive thing, I wasn't ready for that one.
Me neither.
My recruitment story to Zillow actually was extremely positive. I was working at Warner Media, and it had become abundantly clear that AT&T was no longer interested in keeping the company. No shade, no shade. And I knew I did not want to be at an entertainment company. My career is always at a tech company. I just wanted a tech company that I could connect to the media. And I had this relentless recruiter who would not stop reaching out to me. And I'm so glad she did, because it ended up being the best experience I probably had professionally in my entire career. Coming to Zillow has just changed my growth trajectory. It has changed the possibilities and where I even envisioned my own career going. And so that was a really positive experience for me.
Does he need, sorry, I just saw stuff going on.
I think maybe your microphone might not be working, Roz.
Oh, okay.
So we just want to...
You had a good speaking voice.
Well, I hope you heard that. It was some good stuff.
It was good.
Okay. Did y'all, so in the back, you didn't hear what I said? They got me. They don't need me. Go ahead. Your turn.
My name is Ambra Benjamin. I am a relentless recruiter that you spoke of. I'm VP of recruiting, leading tech recruiting for Datadog, which is actually not even an office. We don't have an office here. We're based in New York City. And sort of piggybacking on the concept that you mentioned about knowing what you wanted. I think for me, one of my defining career moments, I spent about 8.5 years at the Artist, formerly known as Facebook, now known as Meta. We don't claim Meta, those of us that were not there when they were Meta. It's like a demarcation for all of us. But yeah, I worked for Facebook for about 7.5, almost 8 years. And one of I was privileged to be able to build out their first ever diversity recruiting function. I put the proposal together, led the team, built the team across a couple different locations. And there was this point in my career where my manager said to me, she was like, either you're gonna have to do this thing or you're gonna have to give that up if you wanna go and do some other things. You either have to do diversity recruiting, be all in, go that route and go very deep. We need you to lead this function globally, or you can do other things. And that was really hard for me because I built this baby. But it was a time in my career when I realized, I was like, I don't want to be a diversity specialist, right? And that is no shade on that as a function or vertical. It's incredibly important, but I didn't see my route going chief diversity officer or any other route other than what I was doing right there. I wanted to lead recruiting on a global scale. And so I had to choose to let that thing go and take on this other global recruiting role, which frankly served me so well in my career. And that foundational experience of piloting diversity recruiting at Facebook, I use that every day in how I operate in my teams. But it was one of those, I was so appreciative that she made me choose, because I don't think I would have. I would have spread myself too thin and not been able to become the leader that I am today.
Hannah?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lucille. I am the Vice President of People and Culture at Warner Bros. Discovery. And I came from the legacy Discovery sites, like Discovery Channel. And my example is actually also when I joined this organization, I had come from, it's kind of the opposite of your story, Ross. So I was at Microsoft experiencing a very forward-thinking technology culture, and I came over, a relentless recruiter gave me this incredible opportunity to help build out the tech team here in Seattle as they were getting going on that. And so came over to do that, but it was such a culture shock, and I really had a hard time finding my footing. And the person that really made a huge difference was my manager, the person who helped really recruit me, bring me in. Rather than kind of accepting that maybe this wasn't the right fit, she really invested in doing things with me for about a month, 2 months. It wasn't efficient, but we did like 2 peas in a pod for many things so that she could give me the context, make sure I had all the information needed to be successful. And then she gave me the most real-time coaching, real-time feedback that I've ever experienced. Like, go into a meeting, I'm driving it, we're coming out of that, she's letting me know real-time, like what worked effectively, how can I tweak to be even more effective? And so, and she did it in such a great way that helped me feel safe, feel like she was really invested in my success. And I'm so glad I stuck it out because it, her advice to me was like, just try this, you're here, like let's give it a shot. And it turned out to be one wild ride the last 5 years. And it's been incredible just from kind of a growth perspective. So very thankful I stuck that out.
All right. Thanks, Hannah. Great stories. Sometimes career paths do not follow a linear path. You just never know what fork in the road is going to come along. So now into the questions about corporate culture and career growth. Culture is often invisible. You can't see it. It's hiding. So how do you integrate, as a company or managers, integrate career development into culture so it's a more tangible, visible thing where they can actually see a path? Hannah, do you want to take that one first too?
Yeah, sure. So I think at my current organization and in previous organizations, I think something that's really helped is making sure that it is physically tangible, that you have artifacts that can really speak to what are career expectations, what are level expectations, how does one grow their career. But I think the most important part really is incorporating it into the way you think and do things as an organization. So making sure that development isn't like this milestone. It's not feedback you do twice a year. It's not a promotion once every few years. It's really looking at like as a business has a need to get something done, how can you upskill the workforce? Who really needs a new opportunity or a stretch opportunity? So I think it's really thinking about how to get your hiring managers thinking about it a little bit differently and making sure that your organization's leaders are talking actively about it. So really making sure it's at the forefront of everything you do. I think it starts as early as recruitment, as early as, recruiters reaching out to candidates and really understanding what are their career ambitions and making sure that we're really feeding that back into all the conversations. And so I think really that mindset shift of baking it into everything you're doing and just incorporating it, just like we're doing with DEI in so many ways, I think career development needs to follow a similar path.
Well, great. Dave, how do we make it more transparent for people?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have launched like formal learning programs, LinkedIn Learning, and they've got that right for career growth in terms of like upskilling. But I think the real nut to crack that hasn't really started just yet is around the invisible parts of career development, which is relationships, networks, mentors, sponsors. I don't know how many people here are like, go get a mentor, go get a sponsor, and you're just kind of on your own. And I think that's kind of the last mile of career growth that a lot of organizations are going to struggle with, because it just doesn't happen equally. Something we were all talking through was how, just from a gender perspective, men are 12 times less likely to meet with a female colleague than a male colleague. So how do you possibly think that the playing field's equal for mentoring, networking, sponsorship? And so since 85% of jobs happen through networks, we've got to create networks and mentors. And I think making that stuff visible and not just leaving it to chance is going to be, it's where 85% of opportunity happens.
And I'll just add, I think, when we say company culture and career growth are not visible, even in the talent acquisition seat, those things should be very visible to your candidates. Whether that is leveraging content, it could be literally an employee who was promoted who happens to be a member of the ERG who's telling their story, and you use that in part of your marketing content externally. Candidates need to be able to see themselves from point of entry of not just this role, but that there are future roles that will be available to me and I'll be developed and I'll be grown and I'll be invested in. And I think we have to make that more visible externally and internally throughout the entire life cycle of the employee. As you mentioned, like it's in our documents, it's how we performance manage. Our culture should be visible in all of these areas, but I think we omit the very first entry point, which is talent acquisition, making sure that candidates not only see this role, but future opportunities here as well.
Can I add on that?
Sure.
I think one of the things that I'm starting to realize, because it's like we have our perspectives of how this should look in TA, Roz and I, since we both are leading in talent, but we also have to do this for our own teams. So it's like we have to also figure this out, right? For when you're leading this global team. And one of the things that's kind of occurred to me over the last 5 years is really this idea that trying to figure out how do you keep career growth from being viewed as this very linear thing, like you mentioned. With that, it's not that, but I do find that people often will reach for things that are very visible and tangible, like promotions and becoming a people manager. Those are the two things, and usually promotions is also more money, right? Those are the things that people point to as these are signs that I'm growing. And I've really tried to work with my organization and try to workshop this within our own teams of figuring out how can we move people from the path that they're on to something that's very different, but that uses the same skill set. And when we were trying to figure out what to do with our recruiting team, when we were overstaffed for a year or so, and we didn't want to do any layoffs, that was one of the things we had to figure out is what does this skill set actually translate to in other parts of the company? And so I think also giving people a little bit more insight and making sure that in your artifacts and in just the way you operate as a company, people have insight into other areas and other functions that could be a good match for certain skill sets, right? What does this skill map to in other parts of the company? And then the other thing I was just going to add on too is mentorship is I think so. People have such a tunnel vision way of looking at mentorship as well, and thinking that this person is with me for my whole career, and they have to be someplace in their career that I'm not, and they have to be more senior. My first mentor and my best mentor at Facebook was significantly more junior than me. And it was someone who I just happened to sit near, and I watched how he worked. And I said, excuse me, you're having success and I am not. Will you mentor me, right? And so I think the idea that mentorship can be in a certain skill or an area where you're not proficient and someone is more proficient in you than that in that thing. And then providing employees with somewhat of a directory of those things, right? Making that visible so people can understand if I want mentorship in data analytics or leading with data or telling the data story or public speaking or executive presence or right, all of these different things, these are the people that I could talk to about this. And then that way it doesn't become work overhead for you as a company to kind of run a mentorship program, but instead you just give them the catalog of mentors, and then they can go and seek out those relationships themselves, and they can end them and start them whenever they want.
Yeah, I love just one quick point to add to
Sure.
that. When you decentralize or kind of democratize mentoring, and it's not just left to people to kind of shoot a dart at the wall to figure out who they should go to, we see it because we launched these across enterprises, and the top executives actually get way less requests than so many people within, and interestingly, the top executives I'm scared of what's going to happen if we get a mentoring program because I'm going to get 100 requests. But actually, when you empower all these people to give them a platform to show that they have X, Y, Z skills, you suddenly create all these knowledge networks that wouldn't have happened. And that, I think, goes back to the heart of this question, which is how do you make these things visible? And if you don't make them visible, then even things like mentoring, the CEO just gets all these requests for mentoring, and it's that's not helpful. There's so many smart people.
I want to go to Roz and then Hannah on this one. Roz, you're seeing talent acquisition and talent management coming closer together, maybe merging to some degree. How does that look, and why is that happening, and what should we know about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say merging. If they merge, we have a lot of angry recruiters in this industry.
Maybe they're speaking to each other?
They're definitely closer than they were.
Yeah.
There was a time where you had talent acquisition. Can you get them in the door by any means necessary?
Yeah.
And then you had talent management, who was responsible for that development. I think we started to see kind of the unraveling of this a lot in the pandemic, right? Because the pandemic put everyone in HR sort of in this spot of what do we have? Who's here? Who are our skills? Are they working? All these things. And so we started to take inventory of what actually were making us successful, what could be sustained in this new environment, what did we need, where were our gaps? And so it was that taxonomy that we started to build, and then we pulled that through, and we're like, hey, this is actually working kind of nice. We now know what we have. We've always performance managed to those things, and we've always promoted those things, but we kind of had a bait and switch thing happening. And you can look in the room as if your company was perfect. Y'all did it too. But we did. We had this thing where talent acquisition had this set of requirements and qualifications and things of years of experience that they were recruiting talent to your companies for. And then talent management had this set of skills and criteria and how our core values brought these things to life. And that's what you were performance managed and ultimately promoted or the other direction for. And so bringing those together in a clear and articulate way of, we're going to hire you to the same exact program that we are going to then performance manage you to, and then promote you to, and develop these skills for you along the way. And being able to talk about that with a candidate early on has just actually been so powerful. It's become very clear of the type of talent that we are trying to attract and the type of talent that we are not. And that is very powerful for a TA team.
I big plus one to that. I think not even just during the pandemic, I think there was like a very logistical factor, like you're speaking of, like, who do we have, what are we doing? But what I really observe is post-pandemic, the market has gotten so volatile. There were so many stop starts, not sure what we're gonna do. And I think especially with our TA team, I know many organizations, including my own, had a lot of pauses, a lot of deep breaks where we were unsure what was gonna happen. And luckily for us, we similarly were able to say, let's do a rotation. Let's bring these TA partners, let's bring these talent acquisition partners to sit with our HR business partners who are finding themselves overwhelmed with just kind of the day-to-day at this moment, given everything that is going on. And we're trying to figure out return to office. We're figuring out, do we need to do layoffs? We're trying to figure out our resource planning. So they came in and they, paired off with our business partners, and the value that brought was just instrumental. I think the deepening of the relationship with the business, building that business context, them really understanding what kind of talent profile do you need long-term, who can really be successful here, and being able to thread the needle on all of that when they did go back to recruiting, to the external market and bringing the candidates in through the door that really fit that profile it was invaluable, honestly. And so I think it continues to come together. I think there's really interesting ways, not just with talent acquisition and talent management, you can think about that. There's probably many places across our businesses where we can think about deployment of talent for interim basis based on the business need. Because I think that volatility, unfortunately, isn't going away anytime soon. And so the more creatively we can think about the redeployment and the skill development of our existing workforce, I think the better off we continue to position ourselves for the future.
And I'll add one more point there. For the TA leaders in the room, how many of you has either the business or someone in HR have wanted to measure quality of hire and you just absolutely cringed? Yep. Well, okay, because you're not gonna measure quality of hire and I'm just gonna get them in the door. Talent management and L&D does the programming. The hiring manager, Lord knows what they are doing on their when they're in their hands. And then you wanna measure quality of hire and hold me accountable for that? But when we are more aligned on like what are the skills for development, and I know exactly what that employee is going to go through in their first 60, 90 days. I also know from a talent manager perspective what training that hiring manager has. I know what touch points they're required for. We're going to check them with our mid-year review, and then we're going to be able to validate that employee's experience in our annual review. I'm actually okay now with the quality of hire metric, because I'm clear on what are all those required trainings, the development, who's responsible for what. And I think now we're gonna start to see more of these measurements be put in place. Because hiring is very expensive, we all know this, especially when we're feeling the restraints, the budgets are tighter, the headcount is much, much fewer. The importance of a hire probably is higher for most of us in our career, unless you were here 2008, 2009, it was really rough at those times too. So the merger, I guess, of TA and talent acquisition get us closer to really having a measurement that we can all stand behind.
Okay, thanks. Here's a question. I didn't tell you all I was going to ask, but it occurred to me because I was talking to somebody at dinner last night who runs leadership development for a major company on the West Coast. And he was just really happy that he has this small department that kind of does it all and didn't really want to be promoted up and all that. And I just wonder if the definition of career growth has changed a little bit or expanded. So it's not just linear, it can be other things. Anyone want to take that on? And it's still respectable in a big company not to have a vertical ambition?
Yeah, definitely. I think some of this is going to come by force, to be honest. And by that I just mean, for me, having lived through big tech ridiculousness, and just to say ridiculousness, I mean, I was at Facebook when it went from 7,000 to 60,000 to 70,000 employees. Like, there were times when we were doing things that were just bonkers, where you're like doing it and you're like, this is gonna be bad. And it was. Like, we knew, right? It was like we knew while we were doing it. We were like, oh, we're part of history. And we didn't know it was gonna be the wrong part of history. But I think that I think that there's this reckoning coming, and I can speak for tech, but I think in a lot of companies where we were experiencing this tremendous growth, like just tremendous growth, and people were getting opportunities to do things that they were unqualified to do. Like that is what happens in startups and early companies and things that are experiencing like, tremendous growth is you get given all this responsibility that you would never be qualified to do anywhere else, but you just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And it's awesome. You get to experience, I remember we were doing promotion everywhere, promotion. You get a manager title, everybody gets a manager title, right? And I think we're coming into this very much more conservative growth that's like feels a little bit more healthy and normal and natural of how it used to be. And it's not going to be the promotion every other year for people. It's not going to be that, so I think that's what I mean when I say it's coming by force. But there have always been those individuals who they don't want a huge trajectory. They're completely happy with where they are. And some organizations, you might call them terminal at their level, where it's like they're not going to, right? And I think we think of terminal sometimes as a bad thing. I actually don't. There's a lot of roles and there's a lot of levels in our organization where I'm like, I love the people that are high performers, solidly performing at what they do. They deliver. You can bank on them every single time. And they're not hungry for the promotion to the next thing that's honestly there's no scope for, right? Like there just won't, and there won't be scope for, a few years. And so I don't know, I think the high growth culture was kind of fueling that like up or out. And I think now we're starting to recognize that there's a lot of value in like the solid core performing category of individuals that you can, they're easy to work with. They know their stuff. They're, sometimes they're deep specialists. And I think that at times like that, there will be times when those individuals may progress, but the distance in some, once you get more senior, the distance in that just kind of goes away and it slows down. And I think some of it is also generational. I'll be frank. Like I think there's some generational expectations that are maybe coming to reality sooner rather than later, if by force or, I don't know. But I mean, these are conversations I'm having with my organization, where I'm just like, I understand you've been promoted very often, but that's not happening right now. We had to announce no promotions last year for a good chunk of the year, and that was a tough message for a lot of people. And then you've got other people that have been in the workforce for long enough to be like, I'm just grateful that y'all didn't fire me. Like the cognitive dissonance between like some folks and others was just shocking to me last year. I'm like, you're not reading the room. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that.
Can I add to that? I absolutely adore you.
Yeah, you did.
Don't
Okay.
sell me a Chrysler and call it a Bentley. Career growth is career growth, and that is still very much alive and well in the workplace.
Yeah.
I think in the earlier conversation, one of the panelists said the thing that we all have heard is clarity is kindness. I think the problem why to your point, the perception around the expectation of promotion or career growth or maybe a lateral move is necessary before you go is because no one's having a clear, transparent conversation about what growth actually looked like from point A to point B. And so while some companies were definitely in that rapid promote more, some were using promotion as a retention mechanism, those are all unhealthy HR practices. Like this room doesn't even need me to go deep on that. I think we talk about career growth, but we don't talk about career mapping and paths. And I think if we can do that and articulate maybe those points in someone's career, they won't be looking like this. It could mean to go from director to senior director means you're going to go from a director role in this expertise and function to this or one of these, then to one of these, and then your path goes up. Just be clear to people about that up front, and then you eliminate that. So career growth is still here. It's something that still has to happen to those people that don't want growth. That's great. When the organization decides we need more from you, we'll tell you that. We'll give you a choice. You'll do it, or you'll decide, I'm out. And that's totally fine.
Can I add
Great.
one more thing that I want to?
Sure, I want to go to Dave on something, but go ahead, yeah.
Oh, are you sure?
No, just go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So one of the quotes I say a lot with my team is you got to go to zero. Like sometimes you just got to go to zero. And the thing that I've noticed is that when people get the artificial or the superficial things that they think are growth, they actually tend to be very unfulfilled at times when it's like nothing is really materially changed. I just got a promotion for work I was already doing, and I got maybe a little bit more money. When I notice people seem to be thriving and feel like they're actually growing is when they have to go to zero. And by that meaning like they're back to paying their idiot tax again, where I'm like, I don't even know how to do this job, or I don't know how to, like I was just given this major project and this responsibility and I don't even know where to start. That is where I love to be. Like I love to go back to those moments in my career where nothing has changed, my title hasn't changed, comp hasn't changed, but it's like I got given something that I have to now work on that I had never done before. And I see that with my team, I see that with others where it's like really figuring out how to help people understand that like when you're most uncomfortable and when you feel like you don't know how to do something, like that's generally the place of growth. Not just the recognition that you're amazing and given like more responsibility to just do more of the same thing. So that was the one thing I just wanted to
Yeah, no, that's really good. It can be scary, but also exhilarating to do something totally new. Where you think you're in over your head, but then it turns out no. Well, thank you, Ambra. Dave, so your company has done research that says that 85% of career opportunities come through relationships. So it doesn't necessarily happen by chance. And the second part of this question is, scaling that up through technology seems to be kind of an oxymoron. Relationships, technology, so it's why I guess some people don't like dating apps. But you advocate it and it has good outcomes. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I think so. 85% of opportunities come through network. I think everyone's been told like your network is your net worth, and that's a LinkedIn and Deloitte human capital stat. If we can create networks, we create more opportunity, we create more opportunity lattice. But the problem, especially as we're more decentralized with hybrid, as skills are absolutely everywhere, as we're like trying to do make way more progress around DEI, we can't leave networks to their own device. And I was at lunch with somebody today, I think Barb was her name, and we were talking about how it actually has to go way beyond just the network. So a lot of people say, go meet people, but competency around how to turn networks into impact is actually like non-existent. And it's surprising for people in our profession because we're all probably fairly good at it. We had to get good at it. But to make opportunity happen, you not only need to create the systematic access to relationships based on data using things like machine learning and AI, and happy to nerd out on that with anyone. But you actually have to then create the conversation guides, the icebreakers, and the things that help them turn connections into impact. And that was a big aha moment for us because so often we made these connections and most people just didn't even know what to do, or they thought like a coffee was a sponsorship relationship, was a mentoring, or was an onboarding buddy, but actually you need to create different experiences. And so while we need to create more networked organizations, I'd encourage you all to make sure that you're actually creating conversation pathways with those and being declarative at whether it's a sponsorship connection or whether it's an onboarding new hire to help new hires accelerate. And that's actually when you tap into the 85% and make that happen inside your organization. The other fun fact I'll share with you all that you might be shocked by is you might all think, oh, we just make networks happen. It's actually easier, and I can share this data with anyone who's interested. It's easier to meet your competitors than it is to meet people inside your own company. I don't know if that's surprising to anybody here, but what does that mean? It probably means they're going to find their next opportunity at your competitor and not at your own company. And so until you create better pathways and permission, it's actually where top talent will follow where the networks are. And again, happy to share any of this data with anyone that's interested.
By the way, I like what you said about easier to work with or meet people outside your company, because I worked at Time Warner too. Just like, I'm not making this up. It's like an octopus, Warner. It's everywhere now, but it's a good company now. And it was really hard getting people like in other departments to just cooperate, get to know you, and everything. It was like they were kind of afraid that you'd be a competition or something. But it's really so. It's great that you created a kind of a network that can go outside those.
Especially for underrepresented talent, by the way, which is a huge opportunity for another day, maybe.
Well, thanks, Dave. I want to ask Hannah now a related question. Why are people still nervous if we're all talking about career growth and it's a wonderful thing? Why are they nervous to talk to their managers about it? And what can managers do to be more receptive?
Well, I think anytime you're talking about your career goals, there's some vulnerability in that, right? You're talking about your dreams, your wishes, and I think verbalizing stuff sometimes can be pretty intimidating. I think also people fear what their managers will think. So are they thinking this person is already itching to go? They're ready to make their next move. I'm going to lose them pretty soon. They won't be as invested in me. They won't give me top rewards because they know I'm looking. I think those are some of the fears that are running through our employees' minds when they think about having that conversation. But I think that's why it's really important, again, to like build it into the culture. And I really think hiring managers have to play a key role here. I know we're talking about networks and mentors and sponsors. I think those are all great and you need all of that, but your hiring manager is like this built-in go-to person who can be a bit of a conduit to help compound maybe some of the relationships you have or help maximize, amplify them. But I think hiring managers, what they can do is really make that a safe conversation from the very beginning. Again, actively asking them, what are your career goals? And if it's not just lateral movement, what are the skills or experiences you want to gain, especially in this environment? I love that going to zero. Is there a certain project that really entices you? You want to lead that new M&A project? Fantastic, let's try it. I think making it a two-way conversation is a win-win for managers so that they can really be, it's a two-way dialogue. Like there's no surprises on them if I think you're having that conversation early with employees. So I think you're far more likely to be able to co-create something. So whether it's something that is another opportunity on your team or a sister team, or you're able to help kind of launch them into something new, I think the hiring manager really has to do their part to create that relationship in that environment where employees can talk to them about it.
And I think I want to add something that you mentioned earlier about it also could be generational. We're at a really unique moment, and I'm so happy to be working in HR at this particular time, where for the first time in a very long time, we're going to have the broadest range of generational workers in the workforce at one time. And if y'all don't have any of these Gen Zers on your team yet, let me tell you, they're my favorite. Because when you're talking about career growth, they're not going to come to the conversation, to your point. It's vulnerable, they're scared. They're coming in on day one. So how do I get the CEO?
Yep.
Right? And no, I'm not going to work that hard, but no, I'm just kidding. But I think to your point, when you talk about like building it into the program and the process, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. For someone, I'm a true millennial. Like by textbook, you can look at all the traits, I have them. I'm so nervous when I'm talking to my boss about my career. I've done a great job, I know that, and I go in and I start with all the things that I'm doing well and how he doesn't have to worry about anything. And I make sure he feels good before I give my ask of like, so how about those next steps? It's not the same with a different generational person. But it doesn't mean that their value is any less. It just means we all want the same things, quite honestly. How we ask those things are different. Therefore, as managers, HR professionals, how we invoke that from employees may also have to look different. And so just making sure that, to your point, because I can't leave this to hiring managers, they're just not going to be able to do it. So we have to build a program for them to run this type of process, to seek out career growth for their employees, and then be responsible for helping them navigate which avenues to find it.
Great. Should companies or managers have more of a culture where other managers are rewarded for not hoarding their talent and actually bringing people along and being a farm team or whatever however you want to describe it?
I love that idea. I was just sitting here thinking we really need to invest more in our first-line managers. I think, as HR practitioners, so often we're working with our senior leaders, thinking about organizational change at a much higher level. And in reality, we talk about all these nuances, and especially the generational differences that I don't even feel fully equipped for. I have no idea how our hiring managers are going to navigate all of that. And so when, I think some of the studies coming out recently, again, from, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the organization, but I think a big priority for CHROs this year in the United States is really investing in management capability. And I think we've been saying that for many years, and I think this year's another really big one, where again, volatility, uncertainty, changing dynamics, people think about career growth differently. We're gonna need our managers to be able to manage figure out how to navigate that. And I think probably figuring out how we identify managers, building the pipeline for the right people with the skills that are interested in that sort of career, because I think sometimes people fall into it thinking it's the way to grow their career, but it might just not be the right thing for everyone. But I think I think it's Amazon does a survey where leaders are able to, there's a public survey result, right, on managers and how they're performing based on what their employees are surfacing. And that, I think, enables, that is the data that other employees are looking at when they're thinking about, do I want to go work for that leader? Do I want to go work for that manager? And I think it's an interesting idea. It might not be the right solution, but I think something there around how are we measuring managers' true effectiveness and their true success needs to be reevaluated.
Yelp reviews for managers. Love it.
Yeah, we've seen that as well at several. We work with over 200 organizations, and there's several where now managers, of course, like results and everything else, but they actually look at what percentage of their employees have mentors or sponsors or enrolled in high potential programs, and they need to get those numbers up. So those are like the leading indicators of whether they'll maybe get promoted or kind of get lateral opportunities, is whether they're really trying to get their own teams into those core, call it capital P programs that get them across the organization. Because if they're hoarding, which I think some might do, they're just not going to hit that scorecard. And we've seen it as high as like 30% of performance management is really like career growth, people growth, quantitatively measured, and not just like, random things on that part of their assessment.
I think that's a very risky question you asked, because because I think this room would then have to look at how we compensate, how we performance manage managers, and how we are rewarding their performance. And right now their performance is usually tied to did they deliver the results. Right?
And not to further someone's
exactly.
career.
And what you're saying is awesome. We need that, but that then means this entire room has to start thinking about a lot of different things differently.
Yeah. Dave, I want to ask you, outside the manager-employee relationship, and when you're talking about building networks, there's a lot of privilege involved, right? I mean, people who already know people or people who look like them. And so how can companies make that kind of career expansion more inclusive?
Yeah, I think that's probably like the biggest question going to the start of this, about all these invisible, like career development is often very invisible, and it's very, very difficult to navigate. And I think organizations have done a great job at formal programs, but all the informal networks, you're on your own. I think what are like some of the best practices? I think first is right from the TA process, make sure people have access to ERGs, BRGs, that they have people that they can like relate to and have different career opportunities. So we're seeing a lot of organizations that even before they join the company, they're being paired with somebody from a different group or a different team to start building that network, just like even before they start on their first day. I think the second thing that we've seen is how do you create proximity between leaders and talent? And we were just with a company last week where they had all of the partners at a professional firm getting their EAs to send random emails to groups of colleagues to get the partners close to the talent. And it was their aha moment is talent all thought they were going to be terminated. So every time but it was the opposite was happening. They were actually supposed to be having these career conversations. And so I think companies are going to be really challenged to use technology, whether it's like all different types of technology, to create proximity in more human ways and not in ways where like HR is having to play career Cupid, because it's actually quite terrifying, but find better ways. Group mentoring is obviously a really great example of that. I think the third way to make it more inclusive is just remember how biased a lot of these processes are. And I think a lot of HR leaders think of themselves when they're designing these programs versus thinking of the realities of all like the multi-generational workforce and how different people talk about things and how that's not bad. But I think really correcting for bias, where you're not just leaving this to choice, or you're just saying, go onto the employee directory and start emailing people. Like if you see those in any of your talent programs, like really think about how you can do better around inclusion, because a lot of talent is just going to get left behind if that's the approach.
Now, in the 2 minutes we have left, we can't avoid talking about hybrid work and remote work. And Ambra, you were talking about, you've said some things about virtual leadership skills and how they might be different from in person. And since that part isn't going away, how can that be made better?
Yeah, man, this is tough. I wish I had the answer to this. I'm in the trenches on this with a very distributed team, and I think many of us probably are distributed, or half your team is hybrid or work from home and the other half is in the office, or some variation of that. And it's been interesting to sort of understand that like when we are in person, like for those of us that had the privilege, I actually do think it's a privilege to have like been in, like kind of come up through the ranks of having to be in the office quite a bit, because I learned so much that I didn't know by just being in proximity with really smart people who maybe weren't on my team, or maybe I didn't work with them day to day, but I learned from them by just watching. I do think that we have to be super intentional when we have a workforce that is all over the place, and in like, well, in more ways than one, but like physically all over the place. And that we have to sometimes create more structured ways. This sounds so terrible, but like for people to get that organic, like how do you translate the stuff you learn by just being around people when you're never in the office with someone? Like, how does that look, right? And so you were kind of touching on this, but like one of the things that we've been trying to do, and I've seen success in, is like coaching circles, learning circles, mentorship circles, right? Like sort of getting people who aren't necessarily always in the same room in a room somehow virtually to talk through things and give them some like light structure of like, hey, this is going to be our focus for the month, right? Like, meet with your circle, don't meet with your circle. It's up to you, right? It's like very self-guided, but giving people an opportunity to extend their network beyond just the like 8 people that they work with every single day, because that can easily become the only Zoom faces and the only Zoom screen that they're ever on is with like the same 8 people. And they will not know, hey, I should go take a walk down the hall and have coffee with that person, because like that person is really good at something, and I can learn a lot about how to sell this company or how to close or whatever. I'm speaking in recruiting terms right now. So I would say like trying to force it a bit with like structuring opportunities for people to come together outside of just their team, outside of like, there's so many ways you can slice, right? You can slice it. You can slice it by, skill set, seniority. You can slice it by location. You can slice it by ways that don't make any sense to anyone. They don't even understand why they're in the same room with these people, but they're just getting an opportunity to extend their network through learning and actually having structured conversations about some of the same things. Because it's like, at the end of the day, everybody kind of has a lot of the same topics and a lot of the same challenges in their job, even if they're in finance or they're in HR. Like, a lot of it is very, well, that's very similar actually, HR and finance, but they can be in like drastically different functions, so.
Well, thank you, Ambra. You notice our clock went to 0. We're 0 setting. Thank you. Call back. Thank you, Hannah, Ambra, Roz, and Dave. You were very candid. That's great. But this was on the record, right? You won't burn me.
Thank you.